Hey everyone, Jeff here. Just wanted to give you my thoughts on the Philip Yancey situation. Some of you may not know, it's been 20, 30 years ago, but he was really a popular author. He's also the former editor of Christianity Today, which still is a really important and good magazine, I think, in general for Christianity, Christian topics. And so when Philip Yancey wrote couple of big books in the 90s and 2000 time frame. One of them, The Jesus I Never Knew, is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I recommend you do read it, even though, the news that's come out is really disappointing. And so let's talk about this. So, there's a lot that we need to address and get off in the open right away. And of course, first of all, there's a lot of people being caught in scandals that have been involved in long affairs or other things. And that's bad. That is very bad. I'm glad that they are, apologizing for this and coming out. But it seems like with Philip, he waited a long time, well into his retired years before he even admitted it. So it makes it seem like, it was something he did a little bit after the fact when, it didn't hurt his sales, didn't hurt his outreach, things like that. So that is one thing that I think is really bothersome, and it's a bad example, I think, to kids today. What do you guys think? Excuse me, let me drink while you're answering that question. What do you guys think about that confession of sins? Towards the almost deathbed, right? Kind of weird. Let me take a drink here. Well, here's what I think. Now, number one, I think the book was fabulous read. And even in that book, for any reader, any Christian, any pastor, I was a youth pastor at the time, just come out of college, it made me take a look inside, because that is really what that book does, is it makes you think about, the Jesus you never know. Is getting back to the Jesus in the Bible and him realizing that he grew up with a lot of ideas about Jesus that didn't really line up with the Word. And the dangerous thing about that is we can grow up in a Christian bubble, in a Christian world, in a Christian culture, subculture, that you think you know all the truth. You think that everybody's told you everything that they know, or everything that is to be known about God, and then you find out as you go along, just like a cult would do, you're only given certain aspects about Christ that are true, and then certain aspects, some are true and some are not. And it's always painful when we find out which ones are not, But that's the best way I can say this now, how this can really shake things up in a negative way, just like Jesus when he was here on the earth. He made some statements that really call out people's hypocrisy, not using all the things that he commanded and just picking and choosing what that we're comfortable with, certain things about Christ or about the Bible in general. And so it was just a very good book, eye-opening. It made you look inside, and I've been looking inside ever since, even before that book, but it certainly came out, and I actually wrote my own book years later, as my own journey began to unravel even further, and I began to see the Pharisees almost every chapter with Jesus. He's not fighting with the Romans, he's not fighting with sinners, he's fighting with Pharisees, chapter after chapter. And so, if that were a Marvel movie, then of course, whoever the hero is fighting with every part of the story is the bad guys, right? So the bad guys are the Pharisees. And it's not good when our modern church looks a lot more like the Pharisee world than the world that Jesus was calling his people to line up with. So there is that. And I wrote a book, like I said, it was published in 2010 or something. 2015 was the paperback. If anyone's curious, I can leave a link. But, I'm really talking right now about the Jesus I Never Knew. And I think he probably should get that book. If I have a link, I'll put that also, because I feel like everybody should read that book at least one time. I think we get a little too overactive when we feel like, okay, I have to think about this book as bad because somebody got in trouble. No, I think that's the baby in the bathwater idea. I think we can receive, if somebody sings or preaches or teaches something that's truthful and it's, God's got his touch on it, and it's true and it helps us, then whether he, as Paul says, even if someone preaches the gospel and they're not doing it with the right motives, ultimately he rejoices that the gospel is preached because people are getting saved. So I think we need to make sure not to go too far that we, now I do think that, and I wonder, did Philip lose his salvation, or did he, or was he never a Christian to begin with? Or, people are asking these questions. And I think there was a lot of good that he did with the book and other things, getting into scandal. Now, this is something that can happen to Christians a lot. It's not just, read 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Paul had to try to help the Corinthian church deal with Christians getting caught in sexual sin. And if you remember right, he finally said, most scholars agree that the 1 Corinthians person, they said in 1 Corinthians 5, to kick out the immoral brother, expel the immoral brother from among you. That's what he said, because he was actually, I think, having sex with his mother or something like that, or something. It was pretty disgusting. But in general, Paul was saying, hey, when we have these problems in church, we need to kick the people out. But he says something interesting, is that kick him out because when he's kicked out of the church, Satan's going to attack him for a while, and then it'll break him. But don't kick him out as an unbeliever, kick him out as a believer. And then 2 Corinthians actually is a second part of that story where Paul is saying, okay, that person has learned now. Now bring them back. They're repentant, they're broken, they wish they wouldn't have done it. Now bring them back. Very interesting. So I think in our Christian culture, or in the culture today, we would be more likely to tar and feather the person and hang them, or punish them, or kick them out of the church, but certainly not treat them like a redeemed person, right? So, now, of course, there are times where we have to do that. And Jesus said a lot of things about, sheep and the goats, and people that never knew Jesus and they just acted the part. But we're talking here about people that can fall into sexual sin and still be Christians and still be able to be forgiven. So I feel like we need to look at Philip Yancey this way a little more. And again, maybe I have a little more background because I was around when that book came out, and it doesn't take away from the truth he brought out to all of us and in his own life, because that was probably at least a decade before whatever this apparently affair started. It was much long after this book came out. So at least a decade from my memory. So I could be wrong on that a little bit, but now there are a lot of scandals coming out, and there are, many of these stories, I question if the minister is even born again or ever was. I really do, because of the other things that were done. But with this story, where it's an affair, and he's just waited too long to share with everyone, I don't know. I think we have to reserve our judgment a little bit and hear a little more about his confession, etc. And I think, he still could be a real genuine born-again person that got caught and he's severely backslidden. That can happen. There are people out there that almost teach like you can't be a backslidden Christian. God just will be done with you. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's not necessarily easy to be a child of God. You've got to come to Christ. You've got to stop going your own way. You've got to receive his presence in your life. You've got to experience transformation of the Spirit of God, And but when that happens, you have a whole new set of desires, a whole new set of priorities. You change, right? You're 1 Corinthians, if anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. Or second, in Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. So Christ can live in you you can fall back a little bit. You can probably backslide a little bit. And I don't think we want to be too quick to just cut people off there. Because if you really are a child of God, I think he has a little grace there to pull you back in. But you're in danger. That's the point. You're in danger. All right. So, all right. I think that's all we need to say today about it. But that's my thoughts on Philip Yancey. Comment below what your thoughts are. Thanks, guys, for listening to this, watching this, and we'll talk to you next time. God bless you.